Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I am a morning lark, but I'm not one of those people who keep saying good morning until you reach a certain level. Because I like my mornings quiet. That's actually why I do it. And my wife is an owl who turns on everything in the house as soon as she gets up. So I get up really early so I can think. Things that are very important. All right, enough about me, because that's why we're not here. Okay, but we are here. This is setting classroom expectations and creating a sense of belonging. Our presenter this morning will be Elisa Liggett, who's Executive Director of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity. There might be some tag team going on, I'm not sure, but she will be the main presenter and maybe joined by Aaron Kitchell every now and then. But Elisa is the Executive Director for Student Conduct and Academic Integrity, as I mentioned, and the chair of the Behavior Intervention Team here at USC. During her 20-year career in student affairs, she's been active in development of classroom management techniques, including methods for preventing misconduct and breaches of academic integrity, an area that I'm highly interested in as well. As an instructor of both University 101 and group exercise, she enjoys techniques to engage any range of student participants, including us. So I'm going to turn it over to her. If there's more that she wants to tell about herself, she will. And I want to say welcome to those of you who are with us online as well. So without further ado, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nate. I have a quick question for you. This is the first time that we're doing this entire certificate program in one day, which seems great from the convenience perspective. But you know how you plan a trip and your flight's at 5 a.m. and it looks like a great idea when you plan it? And then the night before, you're like,
I'm not packed yet.
How many of you are here all day? Awesome. That is impressive. I think that you are now termed the honey badgers of teaching. Anybody familiar with the honey badger as in the animal kingdom?
Oh yes, they know.
They will go for anything. Like, they're voracious. They're like, give it to me. They will go up to a python. They will go up to an animal of prey who they are much smaller in. They're in it. And so, honey badgers, thank you for being that. I can't believe you signed up for this, but we are going to make it worth it. Yesterday we're like,
it's already sounding worse.
7.5 hours of content? Yeah,
Bring it.
let's do it. Absolutely. You might wonder, why do people from academic integrity teach this? Well, here's a concept that brings it all around. If we are looking as educators in a college environment to reduce the likelihood of academic integrity, guess what one of the main ways to do that is? Good teaching. I mean, this is not hard. She's like, why are you talking about this? Well, because it all comes together. A good syllabus, good practices, interaction, all decreases the likelihood. And if we're decreasing the likelihood of an academic integrity violation, a nice byproduct, whichever direction it goes in, is that, guess what? Students are learning more. Who thinks that'd be cool? Yes. So that's what a lot of this is going to center around. What are the techniques that you can use that help your students learn more and then, as a result, are better at being in college and are less likely to violate in the honor code? So what we know, first of all, is we're here for some very specific takeaways. There's nothing like going to something, getting big ideas, not having a chance to kind of figure out, what do I actually do with this? So some of the things we're going to do is understand what are the best practices to amplify student learning in the classroom, and then identify some strategies to kind of foster that sense of belonging. Because if you create a community in your classroom, your students are more invested students are more motivated students learn more. So interactions and retention, this is not a shock, but this is the cornerstone of everything we are talking about. And this was not done by a researcher who's a highly academic researcher. This is done by someone in student affairs, someone who looks at how do students operate and how do we make them successful. So Three of the main things that we're going to talk about are from all different parts of university life. First, we're going to go over David Kolb's theory of learning. Then look at Dan Friedman, who is our University 101 programs director here, and the #1 program in the entire country. He probably knows his stuff too. So how does he decide about information and sense of belonging? And then lastly, Jay Howard does research on norms and participation. And his book is one of my absolute favorites. I brought two today that during the breaks, feel free to flip through. But this one looks at cognitive scientists and how people actually learn. This is Jay Howard's book that talks about, hey, you got bumps on a log in your classroom, time to change what your message is and how you're delivering it. So both of these books I think are phenomenal, and we will keep them up here for your reference at any time. If you're a nerd. So David Kolb and experiential learning. If we want to be good instructors, we teach the way people learn. So David Kolb was one of the first people who said experiential learning is exactly how people get away from just rote memorization, because we know in rote memorization, your retention down the road is a very, very minimal amount. If you experience it and are applying it, you're much more likely, one, to be more engaged in the learning process and to retain it. So for example, we have all seen the type of exercise where you're given a few blocks, a few sticks, and some tape, build a bridge. So David Kolb would say, that's what you start them with. They use their collective knowledge to try to figure it out. They use the concepts they already know, work on it, and then go, that didn't work as well as I thought it might. Perfect. Now you've got the engagement. Now they reflect. What do you think went wrong? What did other groups do that worked better than that? Conceptualize. Now we're actually teaching about what are the structural integrity components? How does physics play in? The instructor's offering the knowledge that would have helped the exercise be more successful. And then experiment, now they apply those to the actual same project. So we're going to talk about how there are different iterations of that. So we're going to start with we've got Kolb, Jay Howard. He has a couple of credentials. And I think what makes him win all of these teaching awards as a sociologist is that he applies sociology and its concepts to his teaching practices. Makes perfect sense. So Jay Howard is renowned. Everywhere he goes, he gets whatever the teaching award is. But this is just so you kind of know where he's coming from. So what does Jay say? Here's one of the most important quotes. As sociologists point out, the classroom is a negotiated social setting. Every time we walk into a classroom, including this one, it's a negotiated social setting. Who has the most power in it, by the way? The person at the front of the room initially. That power can shift, but it's still a negotiated social setting. So instructors are not stuck with civil attention as an operating classroom norm. What do you think civil attention is? This is a phenomenal concept that we have all experienced. What might that be? Anyone? Yes?
Isn't that when students may appear to be politely paying attention, but they may or may not be thoughtfully engaging with content? Should I say that again?
Say it again.
Yes, so that the people online can hear.
Sure.
Yeah.
So my understanding of civil attention is that when students may be politely paying attention, like making eye contact or nodding, but they may or may not be actually thoughtfully considering.
Exactly. And there was someone in the back? Give it just one quick second to see if you can make it back.
I would have made pretty much the exact same point. Just this veneer of civility and
The veneer of civility. Yes. Yes. And I think one of the best ways that when we picture civil attention, it's just the right amount of eye contact. So you could be doodling, look up, just so the instructor knows that you're you're giving the veneer of it, but not enough to get called on to answer a question. So we have all seen civil attention occur. And guess how much learning occurs with civil attention?
very little.
Yeah, there's disengagement. Yet, when we walk in, do we kind of expect that that's what we're going to get? Yes. So that's what we're doing today, saying, how do we get civil attention out of the way and make sure that the expectation is rocked? People walk in, they're ready to do that, and we go, we've got to disrupt this right away. So he sets the tone on the very first day. So what are some things on the very first day? Talking about civil attention and how this classroom is not where that's going to occur. So setting that expectation. And guess what? A lot of our students are probably relieved to hear that. We assume that that becomes the norm, but sometimes they're just absorbing what is around them. Also, the one doing the most work in the classroom is doing the most learning. How do you think that manifests? The one doing the most work is doing the most learning. What do you think?
Is that related to like a flipped classroom setting? So getting them to getting students to actively engage or actively participate in a lesson rather than us talking at them for 50 minutes or hour and 25 minutes.
If we're talking the whole time, who's working the hardest? Yep. So as you're up there going, gosh, I can't get any life out of them, this is the quote that's going to resonate in your head. The one doing the most work is doing the most learning. Flip that. And so he also gives, what are some things that he actually says? So this is kind of a quote for him. He lets people know the reason behind why we're doing what we're doing. So the research shows that students who are engaged and teachers who engage them and don't just put up with are going to help you learn more. And there may be a little bit of risk in that because tons of our students experience anxiety, and the thought of having to speak out in the classroom, as soon as you say that, they're going to be like, oh my God. So he's also very careful to make it a safe feeling space where if they're struggling, other students can help. Other people can kind of pick up the ball. So he wants people to know this is what the expectation is. If that's outside of your norm, this is how we're going to accommodate that because he's still sensitive to those concepts. And then communicate that, hey, I know some of you like to think through it before I ask you to respond. So this is going to be difficult. That's okay. We're going to experience that with at least 20% of this class. So on the first day, what would Jay not do? Obviously all of the talking. But that little mischievous guy would give a quiz. Any idea what that quiz might be on?
Syllabus.
The syllabus. Yes. Why?
See if they read it.
So that they read it. Yes. Trickery at its finest. And you know what? Syllabus quizzes in my class are in groups. So fine. People can be looking for different answers because it's not a rockingly exciting document. I get that. So if somebody's looking for the class attendance policy and somebody's looking for what's the common thread throughout the course, someone else is looking for what are the options that students have choice-wise in there, that's great. But now students have a concept of what to anticipate as you're outlining what you're going to do in the course. So one of the best things he studies is why people talk in the classroom and why some don't. Because this is historically our biggest teaching kind of, you guys are all here and I am so grateful because you want your classroom to not be a static environment, but a dynamic one. So it's fabulous that he says, let's look at the participants to figure out how we can better engage them.
I have a weird specific question. Does he advise making syllabus quizzes like points for it? Is there any difference between making it worth points in the class versus no points?
He does not give it points. That's a great one. And I think, and a part of that is his expectations of participation, whether or not you're rewarded for it, because that's what the collective culture of the class is. So sans reward, this is how you participate. Good question. So how talkers and non-talkers view themselves in the classroom. So we have kind of morphed to students as customers, and for a long time, I resisted this. Because I'm a stubborn individual, but also because I thought, no, that's gonna create the wrong kind of environment in the classroom. Here's the thing though, our students are changing so rapidly that if we don't change and accommodate that, we're gonna lose them on the first day. Well, if my goal as an educator is to make sure that they learn as much as I can possibly help them learn, and that's why we're all sitting in this room, then I've got to be more flexible. So what he is studying is the non-talkers feel like, yes, I need to do my work, I need to do it on time, I need to do it with fidelity, but I shouldn't have to be expected to talk. Okay, this is good to know first thing in the classroom. That you know what, no, good morning. That you know what, the expectation is I'm paying for that instructor's expertise. That's not unreasonable. I get it. So as we're talking about expectations on the first day, important to know, that's why non-talkers may not talk. Turn to the person next to you, and I want you to discuss why you think the talkers do talk. What did you find in your study? Yes, ma'am.
My partner said that students talk because they want the teacher to know who they are.
Yes. And to improve their grade, which is connected. Yep. Jack?
Because the talkers abhor silence.
Yeah. To avoid the awkwardness on the elevator. Yes. In the back?
Oh, it's the same
To avoid
thing.
silence. I'm sorry. I said I was going to repeat it and I didn't. To avoid silence.
Yeah, it was the same insight. She noted that when instructors throw out questions and there's just dead space and you
Yeah.
feel a little embarrassed for the instructor, so.
Yeah, wanting to avoid that
Go ahead.
sociological
Yeah.
phenomenon
Yeah.
of awkward silence. Yes. Yes.
We came up with, they also do it because that's how they learn and stay engaged and attentive.
Yes. And guess what another fun reason is? This is kind of sweet. One of the other reasons people said was to help out another student. Mhm. So usually it's because they're excited about the content, they're interested, they want to learn more, they want to help another student out, they want to avoid having to sit there for longer. So a lot of very candid things that I think we can all agree to. Now, what are the reasons people don't talk? What did you and your partner come up with?
They didn't do the reading.
They didn't do the reading. Or
They think they're gonna be wrong.
they're afraid to be wrong and to be embarrassed. That was the number one.
The internal processor, so they need to reflect on it before they say something.
Yes. Yes, Jack.
They have crippling social anxiety.
Yeah, speaking.
Yeah.
Or they just think.
Give me one more.
I had a student who was genuinely afraid of public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So even raising his hand, if I called on him, his face turned bright red. He just
Ah.
couldn't talk.
Yeah. Genuine fear of that public attention and not being sure that you can check your answer first. And we're going to talk about ways to kind of combat that. But what I appreciate most about all of you is guess what you didn't say, which is what many people assume. Disengagement. On the scale of, in his study, 6 key things came up. The least common answer was disengagement. However, when we're, let's make a little change here, standing up here and nobody's talking, we go, oh, they're disengaged. No. They're usually afraid to talk in a group. So having one-on-one answers sometimes is a strategy that is the least likely one we should go to because we are feeding right into the reasons why non-talkers do not talk. So thank you, Jay Howard. That's fabulous. So some of his words of wisdom also, why do some people talk more than others? I mean, Jay is insatiable. He's studying all these things that happen in classroom dynamic. So 4-to-1, older students are more likely to talk than younger students. 4-to-1. 3-to-1, if the instructor is female, they feel more comfortable if they have some of those concerns because women characteristically, as a sociologist who's fine saying this, are more nurturing and so they feel like if they're wrong, it might be a little bit safer. And then lastly, 2-to-1, students who are sitting in the front are more likely to engage. So what's the simple solution to this? You go to the back 2/3 of the class. This is how insatiable Jay is. Back 2/3, because if, and not in this case, this is just the structure of the classroom. You guys are obviously invested, or you wouldn't be the honey badgers you are. But you are more likely to combat civil attention just by asking the question from the back third of the classroom. This is simple, simple, simple stuff. So classroom discussion matters. The other thing he does in the beginning is let's talk about what the students' expectations are for the instructor. Everybody great with vulnerability? Yay! But guess what? You don't have to be that vulnerable. Look at this list. Anybody look at one of those and go, provide meaningful and timely feedback? Hell no. No. Everybody is likely to go, well, of course I'm going to do more than lecture. Of course I'm going to be prepared when I walk in. So asking them what they expect, 95% of what they say, you could have written down and predicted before they even walked in. This is your wheelhouse. So please, please, please know. We do in my class, I've been teaching University 101 for 20 years. We do expectation students for instructor, instructor for student, and student to student. And then if there are disparities, we talk about why. Guess how many times I've gone, oh, that was a risk that was just too big. They said something crazy. 0. So please know, doing this lets them, what? Feel more of a sense of belonging. Now they have some ownership. Now they're talking about, what do I want this class to be? And how do I let the instructor know that that person has some expectations as well? The consolidation of responsibility is a fascinating concept. So in every classroom, almost regardless of size, 5 to 7 students will do 75 to 95% of the talking. Has anyone ever noticed this? I mean, it's one of those things that once you see it as like an actual principle, you're like, yeah, unless it is disrupted. So we can guarantee this is going to happen. So what is your job in that first week? Disrupt that. We talk about this in my class. We talk about civil attention, and we talk about consolidation of responsibility. And the fact there is some consolidation of responsibility, and just because we don't subscribe to it, doesn't mean that people who are super uncomfortable talking are going to be up in a spotlight all the time. But there's got to be some sharing of that and some agreement between students that we're not just going to keep leaning on the same people. So I want you to turn to your partner one more time. Talk about how can we eliminate this consolidation of responsibility. So before we do that, because that's a big question, take about 10 seconds or so to think about what your idea is on this strategy. Why is think, pair, share valuable? Even if you hate people, and this is what you're not supposed to do, by the way, is like answer the question ever, but we're on a time frame. Think, pair, share. It's true. No matter how anxious you might be, you can talk to one person. And you're formulating your idea first. So you're engaged with the material. You're sharing it with the other person. So they might say something that really makes you go, oh my gosh, that's a perspective I wouldn't have captured. And then if you don't want to share out, you don't have to, but no civil attention can exist during think, pair, share. And it also reinforces what we've been talking about the engagement. Anytime that you're talking, the expectation is I'm going to be asked to talk in class. I know this. So the more we start early and often, as Dan Friedman in his sense of belonging and his teaching skills says, start them talking early, start them talking often. That way when you do it, because sometimes if you bust out with a think, pair, share midway through and they've never talked to each other, you feel kind of the icy, what? I have to talk to the person next to me. What if I don't know? In the beginning though, first week of classes, they're already doing think, pair, share, you got it. What are some ideas about eliminating the consolidation of responsibility? What did you come up with? And
I was avoiding
My partner made a really good point, and I liked it, so I'm gonna share it with everyone. If you have like the constant talker in the class, that's all, love this, calm down.
yes, we're gonna discuss that.
Hey, that's a really great thing. Would anyone else wanna add on that?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that. Who else has something to add to that?
Yes. Yes. And everybody has an idea. So if they are civilly giving you attention, they don't have an answer for you, because you know what? You're kind of checked out. They have to have an answer because you gave them the think time. Yes, ma'am.
So I kind of have a question. I know we really haven't talked about this, but we use Top Hat often that has the open-ended things that just pop up on the screen. So everybody basically has to answer. So then when you see one, you can have somebody further explain it. So that's a little bit different than people aren't talking out loud, but they're still
Perfect. No, that is the exact level of engagement that this is mirroring. Thank you for using that.
I think some of our online folks talk about using Poll Everywhere.
Yes.
And so that's another one, or there's another online tool called Mentimeter, which can be low risk ways to get people to engage. They also mentioned having people do some kind of reflection rather than rote memorization in conversation, because there's low risk with reflection, is your own thoughts and opinions.
And on the counter to that too, why do we ask anybody have a partner who said something great?
You're not sharing your own thoughts. So.
You take that fear of judgment about you not having a great idea because you're saying what your partner thought, and you've already vetted it as, hey, that's good. Exactly. Excellent. So, also, my buddy Jay lets students know that they're going to rate themselves when they, how many of you have a participation rate? Let's start there. I know that we represent the office of academic integrity. Steal this. This is wonderful. Steal it. So you're self-rating. So they're keeping up with how they're doing. And then if they get a participation grade that isn't a 10 out of 10, you have some documented reason why, and you're setting the expectation, look, if you want a 5, here's a very easy pathway. Another thing that we are always taught in U101 is show students an A paper. We think we know that they understand what the expectation is. That's not very fair. They're 18. Little prefrontal cortex is like working real hard and they're not there yet. Go ahead and show them what it looks like to be a 5. Perfect, rate your participation. What if they still won't talk? If they still won't talk, which could happen, we all know classes take on their entire personalities. It is time for us as the instructor, because again, we still have the initial power in that dynamic to change the way we are teaching. Even if there are things that worked in the past, they're not working with this class, we change our strategies. Also, there are some secret weapons. Brad Gardner does a fantastic job of teaching about how to get people to at least do some reflection and some synthesis on their own. So, note cards. You can ask any question you want, have a student answer on a note card, turn it in, or just at least they have a chance to have to write something down, process your question, and answer it. The 1-minute paper. After you've given your course, you've discussed the content, some application to it on a 1-minute paper. Low risk, but forcing some reflection. And the reflection usually is even more important to learning than the predictor. Anybody ever heard of a cinquain? It is a 5-line poem. So Dr. Gardner will give the first line. During the Renaissance, and then you've got to figure out the rest. I mean, I would die. But first line, I mean, that is good, hard work. And that's not something a student has typically done. Cinquain. And they're like, hey, guess what? So I was hanging out in class and now I know what a cinquain is. Group work, having a spokesperson. Again, this removes any of the stress that people have good ideas they don't want to share because of the sharing part, not because of the good ideas. So now each group elects their own spokesperson. You remove that and still get engagement. Museum walk. So if you have those big sticky notes and you ask students to solve a problem or predict something or whatever your question is, their group works on it. They have the spokesperson once again, and the rest of the class can walk around kind of like a poster session at a conference. And then they can ask questions about how you got to your outcome. This is a great learning tool. And guess what? If you, not that we're ever not completely 100,000% prepared for class, but this is also a great way to help students be involved and find their own learning. So this is very little work on the instructor, which is why we're here. But one time when I used it, I was like, because this is a rough day. So, but remembering silence does not equal apathy. These are tools in our pocket so that if we're getting that, here are some little secret weapons to get people talking. On to information and belongingness. So there are a lot of concepts that are common sense, but that we don't always employ. So what is our goal? How many of these do we say I'm committing to these in the fall? Learning names and arriving early and staying late. Many of you cannot stay late because you teach right after. By late, guess what we mean? 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
What is the whole premise of why you would stay after class that's late but not really late?
Pause for one-on-one conversation.
Yes, the opportunity for one-on-one conversation. It is all about the appearance of availability because you are available. And for whatever reasons, how many of you have office hours, have your office flooded with students who can't wait to talk one-on-one with you? Students do not go. My daughter is a college student and she said, I'm afraid to talk on the phone, so I don't want to contact my instructor. And so our director of counseling center says, yeah, people are calling this, students are calling this phone phobia. She goes, it doesn't actually exist. But that any barrier to that communication is enough to shut it down. So just being there after the course is the most likely way that someone is going to approach you if they have any questions or problems. Discussing your hopes for them. You teach what you teach because you love that topic and because you want people who are interested in it to flourish. So here's the thing. When you're discussing your hopes and explaining why you teach, you're creating that belonging. You're helping them know that they are important to you. And you can do this in simple ways. If you're like, I'm really not a touchy-feely person, Lisa, here's your secret weapon. Discuss your book report. If you did a dissertation for a year, it's something you care about. Discuss your passion for it. Don't discuss that, your committee changed your entire topics in measurement school and all that kind of stuff. But if you discuss the fact that I love this topic and here's what I found I didn't expect to, they see that you're excited about this area. They see that teaching is fun. They see that learning is fun. Lots of ways that you can do it without taking too much of an emotional leap. And asking them what they want to get out of the class. Again, a formalized way to do that is through the expectations, student to student, instructor to student, and whatever the third one is. So I want each of you to pick up your pen and write your own learning outcome for your teaching or for a particular class that you're planning. Who may be willing to share? Thank you.
The most successful students will engage thoughtfully with the material, with me, and with each other.
Fantastic. That means nobody else is going to volunteer. That was perfect. Please.
Be able to integrate the knowledge they have learned in class and have it impact their lives and their practice.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And there was one more over here. I wish I was writing these down. These are, you're very motivating. Was there another one over here? That's okay. Another aspect that some people, they actually add the content in and say, will feel excited and motivated by the topic of art history, want to explore, blah, 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 in addition to, but the main thing that we want is, we want them to walk in excited for your class period. We want them to look forward to that. What does that also decrease? Class absences. I mean, academic, all of it ties together. Thank you for writing those. I hope that those are meaningful for you meaningful for you for a long time. What other proactive things that we can do? Understanding yourself and your audience. If you have a 200-person class, we're going to get into some large classroom strategies. That's a little harder if you have all freshmen who are taking a general course as opposed to seniors in the honors college. That's going to change how your teaching style kind of evolves. Understanding yourself and what your comfort levels are and what you can do, critical. Also, if you know that you have some pet peeves, you've got to honor those in the way that you teach too. Setting expectations in the syllabus, verbally, and by role modeling. Why do you think I'm so anal about putting it in the syllabus?
Because that's a contract between you and the students.
Because the contract between you and the student. And where does that come to be the most important part? If you have an issue. Because students will perceive that you don't like them. I know that you don't have time to look at your roster and go, I like you. I don't like you.
I don't even know their names.
Sometimes I worry they think we do this. No, we like all of them. That's why we're teachers. But instead of trying to upturn that, why don't we just say, hey, if you don't like something, look, it's not about me and you, it's not personal. It was published in the syllabus. And then we went over it on the first day. So the only reason I am enforcing that is because that's our classroom expectation, and we all agreed to it on the first day when we set those expectations, and it's clearly in writing. So there's no chance somebody goes, she just doesn't like me. You have also protected yourself, and you've honored what you promised to your students. Using techniques that minimize disruption, easy stuff. Walk around, 1. 2, you have 2 students, let's say the 2 of you are just like chatter. Even if I use geography and I just stand right here, it is almost impossible for them to continue to have a conversation. So if you know that you're not a confrontational person, I am, I wouldn't do student conduct. So I have no problem going y'all. But most people don't. Walk over and stand there. If you know you have a huge class and you have very social students, all you have to do is have a seating chart. Why? Because when I sit next to Erin, I want to tell her a lot because we have a good relationship and I want to chat with her about the crazy traffic this morning or whatever. But you know what? I don't know you, Nick. You look very nice, and you're a sociologist, this is perfect. But I'm like, Nick doesn't care. So the likelihood that you're just going to turn and start a rando combo with again, these sociological concepts and behavioral concepts are at your fingertips. So you're not using, you're just influencing by using some very typical concepts. And be aware of campus resources for referrals. We assume in many cases that behavior that we interpret as bad is just bad behavior when it can be linked to a lot of things. It can be linked to anxiety, it can be linked to depression, it can be linked to lack of sleep, hunger, reasons why people can't focus. So knowing how to ask a student and then letting them know what to do. Asking good questions. The number 1 flaw of all teachers is that we ask a question that we know the answer to, right? See, I just did it. Don't let me do it. If you say, what are the tenets of the Carolinian Creed? There's a prescriptive answer to that. That's not a very interesting question. You could Google it. Does the university have a creed? Obvious question. Should a university have a creed? That is your interesting question because your opinion, and your opinion are going to be different. So you're making your own meaning with the answer to that question. But guess what? Especially when you have a quiet class, what's in our back pocket that we pick out every time that I just go, a question we know the answer to, that they know the answer to. And is it exciting to answer a question in front of the whole class? See? No. You walk away today asking good questions. This takes a lot more intellectual work. Yes, sir.
Is that a big problem as asking questions where you have a prescribed answer and you're not really interested in students' answer that's not exactly yours, which seems to be a problem that goes on. a lot
Yes.
with teaching. So,
That is a great question. You're taking a much bigger risk by asking a question that you don't know what they're gonna answer. But if that occurs, you can also start, anytime we're doing a reverse triangle kind of methodology to questions, you can get them to where you need them to be. So you are taking a risk, but you know what, you're broadening how people think of it. And so you can kind of hone the questions as you get into the more specific ones, because when you're teaching content, there invariably is a point where you're asking questions that have a prescriptive answer. And so I think as instructors, we have to be ready for, this person has a completely different experience than me, and so they might be way over here. We're gonna also talk about how to redirect people who are legitimately off track, not just creative.
Is that what we're calling it?
But this is, next time you're in a session, think about this and think about how you would rework the question, because it takes some good practice. Other good questions, this is from James Lang, who is the Center for Teaching Excellence Director and an English professor at Assumption College, and his writings are phenomenal. Anybody who teaches University 101, he is who is supposed to be our speaker, and Erin and I were like fangirls, and then his flight got canceled. But we feel like we know him because we almost met him, so we're gonna call him. So he opened, some of the things that he has looked at, he's charted what are good techniques for most of his career. So what are some of the things that he uses is, in this article, we'll get you the citation, but from the Chronicle, is starting with 4 or 5 questions already on the board when students come in as a primer. So instead of just saying, hey, we're gonna discuss this today, he looks at what is the problem. This is his American government example, of course, but what problem does the separation of power address? And then he gets into other content areas that are chronological and what forces have eroded that. So when you sit down, you're like, he's already getting your brain going in the right direction, and they're interesting questions. And because it's your subject matter expertise, you know the answers. So you can figure out what the good questions are. Does this take some time initially? Yes, maybe 10 minutes. But imagine if you sat down and there were 4 questions, this, you know you're about to put your seatbelt on, you're going for a ride. Also, this is fascinating. The testing effect is written about in teaching and learning literature all over the place. So what it says is that every time you test or quiz a student, you're testing their knowledge on that subject matter area. So that's good. But guess what you're also doing? We learn by recalling and retrieving information. So every time that you are testing a student, you are asking them to do some information retrieval, which is solidifying that learning even better. So what Jimmy says, I can't believe I just did that, because I just right. When he says that if you're doing that once a week in your class or every other week in your class, you're doing this test, by the end of the class, there's a likelihood that it kind of has an amortization effect. They've learned it a little bit each time. They can retrieve it better, it's more solidified, and they've got the concepts more ingrained by the time the big test actually occurs. Genius, genius, genius. They haven't had to work that much harder at it, and you have a good barometer for how your students are doing. So if you look up testing effect, you'll find tons of articles, but he actually calls it retrieval practice. He's like, what do we want our students to be good at? Retrieval. So the more we're teaching well and the more we're asking them to retrieve, the better they're learning. And the research around that is 100% decisive.
Those last 2 slides, is that all from Small Changes in Teaching, that book?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is actually a Chronicle article.
Okay.
So he has 2 small changes in teaching, first 5 minutes and last 5 minutes. Metacognition. So he also, this is genius. Before he gives an exam, he says, I want you to write down the ways that you prepared for this exam. Then he collects it all. In an aggregate form, takes the grades of the people who did kind of some just cursory things, like I reviewed my notes or I reread my poems. He's a professor of English. And then the people who did much more, takes a lot more work. I wrote an outline, I rewrote my notes, and he does the aggregate scores of both. Why? To say, you didn't work hard enough? No, because he's teaching students how to study. Look what the results are if you do kind of this cursory. Look what the results are if you do an important invested analysis. Not to say, again, boo on you, but learning takes this type of required investment. And guess what? If you know you're not, then here's some data to prove you're not going to get the scores that you want. Again, teaching students how they learn. Imagine if every single student on this campus had just one instructor that talked about some metacognition and used the retrieval practices and taught how students learn. What a difference that could make by their senior year. Because they're not thinking about how they learn, even though they're completely invested in learning more and retrieving better. So his whole goal is, how do we make every instructor just spend 5 minutes on some of these concepts so that they can take those on for their lifetime? Large classroom strategies. Last time we did this class, one of the instructors said, appreciate what you had to give, but my class is too big. Thank you for that feedback. What do we do in our classrooms when we get good feedback? Use it. That was a bad question, by the way, because it had a specific answer. So the minute paper. This is in any class. What's the most important thing that you learned? Reflection, which we know by kids learning. And then what question still remains in your mind? This is a fabulous question because we constantly woo ourselves into thinking we understand what just happened. There's a term of art for this that isn't coming to me, but how often have you heard something or heard a speaker, even in church, you're like, oh, I get the message. You go home to your partner or your dog and you're trying to tell them what you just learned, and you're like, we think we have, I think it's fluency of mastery or some concept like that, where we think we know, but when we're really pressed to say, what's the question we still have, you get to where those gaps in your fluency exist that you never would have analyzed before. So these two questions take 1 minute, and especially in large classrooms, getting people engaged, but also working with smaller.
Are those anonymous?
Yes. And you know what, you can choose. They don't have to write their name on it, they can turn it in, but you know what? If you feel like it's gonna up their game for them to write their name on it, go for it. It's not for a grade. It's for, and letting them know too, this is for you. I'm not asking you this because it's gonna make my lunch taste better. This is for you to make sure that you're checking in on yourself, because in teaching and learning, that's important. You've got to identify the gaps so that you can explore those gaps. I'll be here for 5 minutes if you go, I have a pretty big question that's still left. Other large question strategies. This is from a Harvard instructor who spends 20 to 30 minutes kind of on some KOLB activities. So KOLB says experience first, then we process, learn, and then retest it. So he says, you know what? 20 to 30 minutes components. Dr. Brad Gardner, same thing. Bookends. You start with something, you test it, and then you review it afterward. So split the students into groups so that they have to participate in active learning. So you may do some teaching or some experimenting, let them work out, problem solve, whatever it may be, bring them back together. In this particular article, this Harvard instructor says, the students admitted they learned more because they had to be engaged. Jackpot! So by making them have to talk, and your group size, I have found, I don't know what your experience is dependent too. 3 people is your magic number. 4 people, 1 can disengage. So he doesn't talk about that here, but that's just a little experience wisdom. And the naive task. So giving them a problem in the beginning that they don't have the concepts yet to solve or the knowledge to solve. Let them get invested in it, work on it, and have some interest in, I'm so irritated, I couldn't figure that out. Perfect, naive task. Now you teach it, and then they work together, make the predictions, and then re-examine. Also, Vanderbilt University This instructor does 2 types of quizzes. So the first one is at the beginning, kind of a naive task sort of thing. You realize what you don't know, and you're primed and interested in how do I figure that out. Also, here's an open outline. Fill it in as we go. I'm asking you questions. You could almost use the same 4 questions we talked about in the 5 minutes or 5 things you do in the beginning of class. What are those 4 questions? Students are filling them out as the class goes so that they're watching, learning, and we know some of the best ways that people learn is to handwrite. Typing doesn't stick up here as much as handwriting. So for faculty members who are like, I don't know what to do about laptops. I do. Here's a little teaching and learning lesson, students. You'll learn more if you're handwriting it. That's partly why I don't want you using a laptop in the classroom. Totally separate from Facebook. Also, giving choices. So if you have your course content and you have 80% of their grade is based on tests and quizzes, that last 20%, give them 3 options as to how they earn that. So in my class, they have to do something on the history of USC or a tradition. They can do a scene cane. I mean, they can do an interpretive dance. But I'm going to put down here your 4 options so that I have some sort of rubric in which to grade it. But give them some choice to express themselves in a way that they think they do best, and they're more interested in it because, again, the more we can give them the ability to find the meaning in what we're getting them to learn, the better. So there are lots of ways to give choices. I can't. Explaining the why. You know why you created, is that better? The course and what the content is. Then we imagine they can read our minds. I have a fact, they cannot. So connecting the dots for students as to why they're learning, what they're learning, and how they apply it, critical. One of the tips also in the what's in the last 5 minutes, he says you have to apply the concepts that we just learned to 5 current day issues, or things that are happening. So we are looking at the fact that we just studied art history, and art history used to reflect religion and politics. Maybe what are some open air art pieces that you have seen that reflect current political or societal issues? Now students are taking, what is this knowledge? How do I apply it? How am I seeing it in my everyday life? That still gets back to the why. We're studying this because everything that happens in history has some sort of resurgence here. Instead of saying that, show them some of the whys, building the connections between assignments. JQ in University 101 does a great job because he'll start with the history of USC, then they do a walking tour of the horseshoe. All the way through the course, they are revisiting what that concept is. In my class, we do This I Believe. And so they first start reading the NPR, Nerd Person Radio, essays on This I Believe. Then they look at how do I define what my values are and what's important to me. Now I have to write it and I have to deliver it. So we have gotten them to define values, to be able to name that value, to write a speech that is convincing, and be able to deliver it in a public speaking forum that's safe by that time because we've had the whole semester together. So how are we tying all of those connections? There's a point to reading in early September because you're gonna need that when you write it in late November. Also prioritizing discussions, we talked about this, talk early, talk often, so that they know there's expectation. If you know you might get called on, this is the oldest law school, crappy pedagogy, frankly, but is this fear factor that the instructor's gonna call on you at any minute, right? Why do they do that? Totally to scare you into paying attention. Well, that's some cheap teaching if you ask me. You've gotta be good at getting them to pay attention. Oh my God, I'm gonna get in trouble with Jimmy and all the law school instructors. That's an old one though. 15-minute spurts. Again, figuring out how do you arrange your content in 15-minute spurts. That's gonna go, it's gonna align with how people's memory and their attention spans work. Have at least 2 active strategies per class. That can be them writing something down, think, pair, share, a group of topic, and then make time for the student reflection and connection at the end. which can also be as simple as the minute paper. What are you still struggling with conceptually? Redirecting the dominant speaker. Oh, this is my favorite part. Just like we assume that if students aren't participating, that it might be from disengagement, we assume that the person who is the dominant speaker has self-awareness. My experience is that usually, I mean, that's innocent, right? It is a lack of self-awareness. They don't even realize that people around them are like, nobody wants to be the person creating the, So it has to be a lack of self-awareness. And here's the other part. They're not your civil attention folks. They're the opposite. They are in it. They're your honey badgers. So thank you, first dominant speaker, for being invested in what's happening in class, even though you're kind of a pain in my rib right here. But let's talk about how do we divert it so that we're preserving their dignity and we're making sure that it doesn't create that consolidation where people go, I don't need to say anything because that guy's going to say every single thing that needs to happen. So let's hear from someone who hasn't spoken today, doesn't single out the speaker, just says, hey, rest of the class, remember consolidation responsibility? We're edging past that. We need to recalibrate. What do others think? Placing some responsibility. And I haven't heard any comments from those of you over here. This is a little more assertive. But if the person's over there and we're over here, all the attention and the dominance in the room is over there. Shift that geographic dominance to where people go, oh, I'm up here. Redirecting the speaker going down the wrong path is one of the hardest things. Because again, anytime, and Jay Howard in his book talks a lot about this, a student's biggest fear is feeling ashamed in a classroom, of being embarrassed. So how do we apply that to somebody who really is incorrect? So one of the important parts is, hey, I've got to preserve this person's dignity. So usually we're going to say, talk about how you got to that conclusion. If they realize, you know what, I can't really validate how, okay, you haven't been the one to have to say that, but you're also helping them process and learn that. And you're tempting me to go down that path. I'm going to get us back to the main point just for, I've used this a million times, just for time's sake. You're tempting me, but let me bring it back to the content because we only have 15 minutes left. And these are all on the slides that you can put in your back pocket. Jack.
So I'm wondering specifically how in this,
Give the microphone.
I'm wondering specifically how in the second concept of redirecting the speaker when they're going down the wrong path, how you might integrate that with the Socratic method, which in many instances is designed specifically to allow an individual to go down the incorrect path to develop more effective learning.
Which kind of gets to your question. In that case, because we're dealing with people who in many cases aren't self-aware and are oblivious, that may be a one-on-one conversation. And at any point we can have a one-on-one conversation except when you're in the middle of the classroom and it's happening. So if you're using a Socratic method, which is phenomenal, and one person keeps dominating, then it's important to say the Socratic method doesn't work if only one person's answering. So, and usually those students are just as invested as you are and other people participating and learning. And so that would require, which is a little more difficult, a one-on-one. Great question. Encouraging civil behavior, other things in large classrooms, letting people know the expectations at the onset, decreasing anonymity. We know all of the crazy social things that people will do if they feel like nobody notices. Making sure, again, knowing names is part of that, that you're making eye contact, being there early, asking about how one's spring break went, whatever it may be. Encouraging active learning, which we've talked about, and then examining your behavior and seeking feedback. If you ask students, what are your pet peeves on that note card when they're introducing themselves, that's the other thing. Beginning of class, if they write their name, their cell phone number, what they want to get out of the class, and what their teaching pet peeves are, ownership. Now you know, oh gosh, don't do this. But when we look at these pet peeves from students from this Vanderbilt researcher, it's, again, stuff that we would probably feel as a pet peeve too. So the likelihood that you're going to get stranded by an answer that you can't accommodate is low. So let's say it blows up. You do have to talk to a student because they have been disruptive in the class. What we least want to do is what we should do. People want to be able to say, I'm going to give a blanket statement to the class. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in addressing concerns. If we go back to the self-awareness concept, there's a good chance that's going to fly right over the person who is supposed to hear it. And you've got most of the great students in there. So chastising, I think, is easy. It's convenient. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's not awkward. But guess what? The likelihood that that's going to solve your problem is about this big, unless you have a class of like 10 people. So what are the other ways that we address concerns? If you need to meet with a student, you have some objectives. We're going to get specific into this later, so I'm not going to get into the weeds. But you want to be very objective about what the concern is, how is the student doing, what's the purpose, why is it unacceptable to you, and what happens if it continues to occur. Very objective, doesn't get a lot of hurt feelings and I hate you because I sit at home on Friday night and go, you, not you. Clarify what the student is saying. It's important to always make sure that they have a chance to explain what's happening. If you don't, and even if it's not a legitimate reason, if we don't feel heard, do any of us feel like it's been a fair interaction? Never, 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 never. Approach the student from a position of concern. I statements, I'm concerned about how you're doing. You haven't been coming to class. You've been leaving 6 times during the class, whatever the problem might be. Usually, your first feeling is one of concern with what's going on. And then offer to make any contact with a resource. We are such a resource-rich campus that you don't have to solve the problem, my friends. You just have to know who to send them to. You can call Center of Teaching Excellence. You can call us. We are happy to help with this. If you do have this meeting, which is about 10 minutes, after the meeting, follow it up with the email so that, again, protection for you, clarity for the student. They might have been so nervous during your meeting, they didn't hear a thing you said. So let's say afterward, here's what we discussed. Here's my pro tip on these emails. The friendlier you are, the better it goes because they feel awkward going, you're still in a position of power. They feel awkward coming back into the course because they're like, oh my gosh, this person hates me. If you're like, thank you so much for being with me. It was nice to get to know you a little bit better too, even though it's under these circumstances. Hope you have a fabulous weekend. Don't sweat too much. Then also if they come back later and go, she hates me, I have some data to the contrary. And that's not why you're doing it. I think all of you hope your students have a good weekend. So you don't have to be all official and like law and order. You're a human. Be human in these emails. Let them know what the expectations are, what you talked about. Thank you for meeting with me. I know that's not what any student wants to do. I feel much better. Cell phone policies. We all know that classroom disruptions, or some of the things that make us the craziest, are kind of groups of chatter and cell phone use. So we have attached a cell phone policies or review where faculty stand. So of course, as you know, we like research what people do for our cell phone policies. This is an instructor who took a really fabulous approach. She said, despite the fact that you think you can multitask, brains don't multitask. My job is for that 15 minutes to teach you as much as I can. So my cell phone policy, again, is based on concepts of teaching and learning. If you have a cell phone out or on you, you are automatically, and some students say, I'm addicted to my cell phone. Let me help you because you cannot focus. You know it, I know it, and it's proven by data if you have that cell phone. So this is why my cell phone policy exists. And this will be an attachment for the Center for Teaching and Learning. It is fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. Not just be like, you can't. No, because guess what? Students don't learn if they are looking at a screen. We know this. Classroom management. So we also have a issues and solutions table. Thank you for bringing it up. Yes, ma'am.
So I want to come back to something that you said earlier with the large classes, right? Because I think, and the cell phone policy thing triggered that. So if I start with my expectations for the class, and I tell, in my case, my 2 pet peeps, cell phones, and bananas, right? So they drive me crazy.
Pet peeves are cell phones and bananas for those of you online. Yeah.
Yeah. I hate the smell. So, you know, so that's kind of like my, and they laugh at the banana thing, so it makes me human because I'm not.
I love you.
But in terms of when those things are violated in the class, right? And other things too. I just kind of paused, and because we've been talking about these things, you know, early and often, it is the rest of the class that kind of uses their social power to kind of say, yeah, the crazy witch is about to take off, so you better put that on.
Yeah.
Right. Rather, because I try to avoid those one-on-one conversations a lot.
So her strategy is social policing, self-policing. So by stopping, creating silence, you've created that awkward silence that people want to fill, and the only response is to fill it with side-eye. So she is using the side-eye for students to say, we have a social expectation and you're not meeting it right now, and now you are causing a disruption to all of us, and she has not uttered a syllable. Dang. Yes. Especially in larger and smaller classrooms, once you have that expectation and trust built in, you can guarantee that self-policing will occur. So you're the master. Get up here beside me. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about phones. So our students use their phones a lot for attendance and these like the top hat and all of that.
Yeah.
What is a good way to have them be able to have their phones out for those kind of things, but also somehow prevent them from?
That is tough. The question is about when we use cell phones in the classroom as part of a Kahoot or whatever the medium may be, how do we then draw that line? You have to physically do it for them. And so my suggestion, I had not thought about the answer, I don't think about a good one, is to say, now I want you all to put it into your backpack, into your purse, and you're watching and you're walking around as that occurs. Not that you're gonna get 100%, that's okay. If you have 80%, that's the expectation. You're creating some sort of physical barrier. You're accomplishing most of what we need to. Okay, everybody take a moment to get your cell phone back out. I mean, even if somebody's faking it, you know they're gonna lean over. You know they've had it the whole time. So you're still building in this is the expectation and now I want to. But if you let them have it on the desk, that multitasking, I hate to admit this, but I have to tell you something. Their phone is more interesting than we are. So let's accept and acknowledge and then help them make sure that we're not creating an environment where that's an easy temptation and an easy satiation. Great question. This classroom management of specific behaviors is genius. This has some typical things that occur, and this is also posted on CTU's website. We use this all the time. What is the typical thing that happens? Undermining the instructor's authority, leaving class too frequently. What are some of the root causes and what are some of the best ways to address it? So we highly suggest people keep this in their office because this keeps you from feeling too emotional when it occurs. Because if we do take it personally, it does hurt my feelings when somebody thinks that Facebook is way more interesting than I am. Because I think the topic we're discussing is fabulous. Then I check myself, go to this and say, okay, what's the root cause and how do I make sure? This is genius. I can't believe it's free sometimes. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about when you were talking about having those one-on-one conversations with students outside of class. When you're having those one-on-one conversations, how do you get those students into your class, into your office without calling them out in front of everyone else in class?
They heard the question. So there are two ways that you can do that. One is to send them an email and say, I need you to speak to me after class, but give them a specific time. The recommendation is not that you do it in your classroom right after. You may have constraints that don't permit you to go to your office hours, but asking them to come to your office is by far the best. What you want to do though is when you're asking them for that, don't scare the crap out of them, people, because then they're not going to come. So letting them know hey, Nick, I want to speak to you. Are you available at my office hours on Tuesday at 10? It'll only take about 10 minutes. I've made it hard for him to say no. So you can still say, so-and-so, can I speak to you right after? Sometimes there's just no getting around that. But you've also got that one-to-one contact and you're sure that they've received that invitation. And so that's what I typically do is, or if I'm arriving early and staying late, I've got 5 minutes before class starts, people aren't really paying attention. Nick, I have some concerns I want to talk to you about. Can you come to my office hours tomorrow at 10 o'clock? Quiet, discreet, maintaining dignity. So the best is if you could do it not in the classroom setting. Send a text. So issues and selection table. And people feel nervous too that I don't want to confront this situation because I don't want to make it worse. Valid, very valid. If I can offer a data point, I have been kicking people out of school for 20 years. I do not have a cap in my A. So while certainly everything that we watch is retaliation based, right? On TV and it's very scary. But if you are doing it and you're human about it and you're listening and you don't make a student feel like they've been treated unfairly, what do they have to retaliate against? So our wonderful captain in our police department deals with this all the time because he does victim services, and his quote goes around, you're already feeling tense, you're feeling awkward in your interactions with that student, that can affect your whole ethos with the class, that already exists. So you can either choose to do something about it or not, but that's there, that opportunity already exists, so why not go for resolution? That's how you're actually decreasing the likelihood that this is gonna escalate, and the escalation is where people start to kind of envision retaliation. He is genius. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that in the future sessions. Questions and, I'm 5 minutes over. I don't think I can do questions and comments. But if you're here all day, I will arrive early and stay late in case you have a question, especially if you don't want to ask in front of the whole group. Honey badgers, thank you. I appreciate your attention. You are wonderful.